My name is Ross O'Kelly. I'm the creator and host of the Green Urbanist podcast. I'm also a planner and urban designer by training. I think I always say that the podcast is as much for my education as anyone else's, because I was sort of trying to educate myself around sustainability and climate change. I sort of sensed that that was the direction the industry needed to move into. This was sort of shortly after the Extinction Rebellion protests in London in 2019 and all that stuff. It had really come to like the news and the top of the agenda. So I was sort of reading things and trying to figure things out. And then I just thought, well, now I have loads of free time. The whole world just sort of stood still. Like maybe I can start sharing that with people, but also get a chance to interview people and have conversations with experts that I wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise. I think a podcast is a bit of a weird thing because it's a very one-way relationship you have with the listeners.
Yeah.
In the sense that they end up knowing a lot about you and hearing your voice for dozens of hours at a time, and often you never meet them or hear them at all. But people do reach out by email or send me Instagram messages or LinkedIn messages and that kind of thing. And that's a really lovely thing to understand who's listening and what they get out of it. From the stats that I have attached to the podcast, but also the people who reach out to me, on social media or through email, my sense is that it's a real mixture of students, people who are studying planning or something related to that, right through to people in all, parts of their professional life, from early career planners and architects up to sort of people who direct companies or university professors and that kind of thing. So I think there's enough in there for everyone along that spectrum, but really it's like built environment professionals who have a good grip of the basics of their profession and want to learn more and expand and learn from other people who are doing interesting things. When you're starting a podcast, there's like technical challenges, but then there's also like emotional challenges because you're sort of putting yourself out there, and I think a lot of people struggle with like imposter syndrome and things like that, and this feeling of like, well, why would people listen to me? But in terms of the technical stuff, I think what's really great at the moment is that because podcasting has just exploded so much, there's so much information online to get you started. So if you can just go to your search engine of choice and say, how do I start a podcast? And you'll get reams and reams of blogs and videos explaining all the technical points of how you can make that happen. But what I felt was maybe flying under the radar, was not getting as much discussion, was the less tangible aspects of sustainable places. So things like planning and urban design, which maybe don't have hard numbers attached to them. But are really, really important, So, for instance, a technological solution to transport emissions is, say, electric vehicles. But a planning and urban design response to that looks at things like density and the 15-minute city and, connected neighborhoods and public transport and all that kind of thing. It's much more sort of nuanced. So I really wanted to bring that conversation forward and provide an avenue where people could have those more nuanced, sort of tricky conversations, as well as talking about the technical details, because I do have architects and engineers on to talk about, the hard stuff as well. Sort of broad range there. I think everyone wants to be achieving a sustainable world, sustainable places, but actually what's come to pass is that there's many, many different narratives and versions of what that could look like, and sometimes they are at odds with each other. And so as I've been developing the podcast, I've been trying to have many different perspectives on, and sometimes slightly grating, you can have guests back to back on the podcast who have very different worldviews and very different approaches. But actually in many ways I think they're all valid and they're all worth hearing about, and I think sometimes it is up to the listener to maybe take a critical perspective and think about, actually, what do I think of this perspective that someone's sharing and that kind of thing. So I definitely try to have sort of challenging perspectives on without trying to sort of alienate anyone in the process, which is tricky. When I first started, it was very much a case of just reaching out to people I knew, and then building up the confidence to like email a few people that I thought were interesting and that kind of thing. I also try and keep an eye on the things that I'm really interested in covering and people that I'm I admire and who I think deserve to be amplified, and are maybe missing from the conversation in the sector. Sometimes it can feel like if you're trying to sort of appeal to everyone, it becomes a bit too broad. And actually, if you specify down and you decide, actually, you know what, I could do a really good podcast about planning for non-planners. And I could see that if you had some entertaining hosts and people who had that real skill of like putting things into plain English and explaining why the planning system is the way it is, why certain decisions are made, etc. I think that could actually be quite an effective and popular thing for people, because I think even if people don't think of themselves as being interested in planning, they're definitely interested in how their local areas are changing, and they may even get involved with campaigns, you know, for and against certain things, or commenting on planning applications and that kind of thing. So I think there probably is a bit of a niche here for a really good podcast or several podcasts, sort of helping the general public along with some education, some demystifying, you know, what happens in the planning world to an extent. And I think that would be really helpful, because we haven't always been very good at avoiding, you know, the acronyms and the jargon within the industry. So that could be a good call for anyone listening or watching this.